Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like you could disappear tomorrow and the people who are supposed to love you most would barely notice because they were too busy enjoying the life your generosity made possible. Today, I want to share a story that might touch something deep inside you, something you might recognize in your own heart. This is about Sarah, a 28-year-old woman from Denver, Colorado, who discovered that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are actually the ones who see you the least. Sarah had always been the responsible one, the daughter who never caused trouble, who worked 3 jobs through college, who sent money home when times got tight, who answered every crisis call with her wallet already open. She thought this was love. She thought this was what family meant. But sometimes it takes a moment of absolute vulnerability to reveal who people really are underneath all their promises and expectations. Picture this scene with me. A sterile hospital room in Denver General, the kind where fluorescent lights buzz overhead, and the smell of antiseptic can't quite mask the underlying scent of fear and uncertainty. Sarah is lying in that narrow hospital bed, her body fighting an infection that turned dangerous faster than anyone expected. Pneumonia had progressed to sepsis, and at 28 years old, she found herself hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath, every sign that her body was still fighting to stay alive. The doctors had been honest with her, the kind of brutal honesty that cuts through all pretense. The next few days would be critical. Touch and go, they said, those words that sound almost casual until they're applied to your own life. Sarah reached for her phone with trembling fingers, the simple act of dialing her mother's number taking more effort than it should have. When you're scared and alone and fighting for your life, you call the people who are supposed to drop everything and rush to your side. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring, that familiar voice that should have brought comfort, but instead brought something else entirely. Sarah explained where she was, what was happening, how frightened she was. She painted a picture of machines and monitors and a daughter who needed her family now more than she'd ever needed anything. The response that came back would echo in Sarah's mind for months afterward, not because it was shocking in its cruelty, but because it was so casually dismissive, so effortlessly selfish. "Oh, honey, that's terrible timing," her mother said, and Sarah could hear the sound of a zipper in the background, the rustle of packing. "We're literally at the airport. The whole Hawaii trip is already paid for. Everything's booked. You know how expensive these last-minute changes are. We'll come see you when we get back, okay, sweetie?" Click. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone in that sterile room, wondering if she'd somehow misunderstood. If maybe the medication was making her confused about what she'd just heard. But there was no confusion about the social media posts that started appearing within hours. Her sister Emma, just 24, and living a life funded entirely by Sarah's generosity, posted the first photo from the airport. "Hawaii bound with the fam. Sometimes you just need to escape reality and live your best life." The exclamation points felt like tiny knives. Her parents followed suit, her father posting golf course selfies with captions about retirement dreams coming true, her mother sharing sunset cocktails with hashtags about grateful hearts and blessed lives. None of these posts mentioned their daughter fighting for her life in a hospital bed in Colorado. None of them acknowledged that this Hawaii escape was funded by the woman whose heart monitor was currently beeping in steady rhythm in an intensive care unit. As Sarah scrolled through image after image of her family living it up in paradise, something began to shift inside her chest, something deeper than the physical pain of her illness. The turning point came on day 3 when Sarah had finally stabilized enough to think clearly when the fever had broken and she could string together coherent thoughts about what was happening. She sent a text to the family group chat, the same chat where they usually coordinated holiday plans and shared daily updates. "Hey everyone, I'm stable now but still pretty sick. The doctors say I'll be here for at least another week. I'm really scared and I feel so alone. Could someone please come?" She tried to keep the desperation out of her words, but it leaked through anyway. Her mother's response came an hour later, during what Sarah could see from the timestamp was prime beach time in Hawaii. "Stop being so dramatic, Sarah. If you're texting, you're obviously fine. "We'll come when you pay for our early flights home and reimburse us for the vacation days we'd have to cut short. This trip wasn't cheap." The message hit Sarah like a physical blow, but it was her sister's response that truly broke something fundamental inside her. "LOL, Mom's right. You've always been such an attention seeker. Maybe almost dying will finally make you interesting for once." Followed by a laughing emoji and a beach selfie that had been taken minutes before the text was sent. Sarah stared at those words until they blurred, reading them over and over, taking screenshots not because she wanted to remember them, but because she couldn't quite believe they were real. That's when the pieces of her life began rearranging themselves into a picture she'd never been able to see clearly before. Sarah wasn't the beloved daughter and sister who was valued for her kindness and generosity. She was the family ATM, the reliable source of funding for everyone else's dreams and desires, and spontaneous vacations to tropical paradises. She was 28 years old, earning a six-figure salary as a senior marketing director for a tech company, and she'd been systematically supporting 3 other adults who were perfectly capable of working but chose not to because Sarah made their chosen lifestyle possible. The math was devastating when she actually added it up during those long hours in the hospital bed. For the past 3 years, she'd been paying her parents' mortgage when her father's early retirement fund fell short. She covered her sister's car payments, insurance, and most of her living expenses while Emma pursued her dream of becoming a lifestyle influencer with fewer than 1,000 followers. She'd given her mother $15,000 for what was described as emergency cosmetic surgery. She paid for family vacations, holiday gifts, and countless dinners and shopping trips that were always framed as family bonding time, but somehow always ended with Sarah picking up the check. And here they were, on a Hawaiian vacation that she'd unknowingly funded through her contribution to their mortgage payment that month, telling her to stop being dramatic while she fought an infection that could have killed her. The irony was almost artistic in its cruelty. She was literally paying for their vacation from her hospital bed, while they told her that her near-death experience was an inconvenient interruption to their good time. The next few days in the hospital gave Sarah something she'd never had before: time and space to think without someone needing something from her, without crisis calls and urgent requests and guilt trips about family obligations. She had her laptop, and she had access to all the financial accounts and automatic transfers that had been quietly draining her resource for years. She started with the simplest changes, cancelling the automatic transfers that paid for her parents' mortgage and her sister's car payment. Next, she called her bank and reported the credit card she'd given them for emergencies as stolen. It wasn't technically theft, but it felt like theft every time she saw charges for restaurants and shopping and entertainment on a card that was supposed to be for genuine emergencies. The customer service representative was sympathetic when Sarah explained that she was calling from a hospital bed and needed to protect her financial security during her recovery. Then came the bigger moves, the ones that required phone calls to lawyers and financial advisors and insurance companies. Sarah had been generous not just with her money, but with her credit, co-signing loans and mortgages, and putting her name on accounts to help her family members qualify for things their own credit couldn't support. This generosity had given her legal authority to remove herself from those obligations, and over the course of 2 days, she systematically extracted herself from every financial entanglement that connected her to their lifestyle. The house they lived in. Sarah was on the mortgage as a co-signer, which meant she had the right to demand immediate repayment or force a sale. The utilities that were in her name to boost their credit scores? Cancelled. The family phone plan that covered all their devices? Terminated. The car insurance that protected all their vehicles? Discontinued effective immediately. Each cancellation felt like removing a small weight from her chest, a burden she hadn't realized she'd been carrying until it was gone. Meanwhile, the Hawaii posts kept coming, each one feeling more tone-deaf than the last. Emma shared videos of herself getting couples massages with some guy she'd met at the resort. Her father posted golf course updates with captions about living his best retired life. And her mother documented every meal and shopping excursion with gratitude posts that mentioned being blessed and grateful, but never mentioned the daughter whose hard work and sacrifice had made it all possible. The first phone call came on the evening Sarah was finally released from the hospital. She was weak and exhausted, had lost weight, and felt like she was moving through the world with new eyes, seeing things she'd somehow been blind to before. Her phone rang at 6:47 p.m. and her mother's voice was panicked and sharp. "Sarah, there's something wrong with our credit card. It was declined at dinner tonight." Her mother's tone suggested this was somehow Sarah's fault, that she should fix it immediately. "That's strange," Sarah replied calmly, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Maybe you should call the bank." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Then came the explosion. "What do you mean, call the bank? You manage our credit cards. Why would it be declined? What did you do?" "I reported it stolen while I was in the ICU and you were posting vacation photos," Sarah said, each word deliberate and clear. "It seemed like someone else was using it." The fury that erupted from the other end of the phone was immediate and volcanic. Her mother screamed about being stranded, about how embarrassing it was, about family obligations and gratitude, and how dare Sarah do this to them while they were vulnerable and away from home. "I thought you paid for this vacation yourselves," Sarah said when the screaming paused. "At least that's what you told me when you explained why you couldn't visit me in the hospital." Click. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah hung up on her mother, and the feeling was surprisingly liberating. The calls that followed over the next few days revealed the true scope of her family's financial dependence on her generosity. Her sister called crying, then screaming, then trying manipulation tactics that had worked for years but somehow felt powerless now. Her father attempted to be the reasonable voice, the negotiator who could smooth over this misunderstanding and get their financial support restored. Each conversation followed the same pattern: demands, guilt trips, accusations, and finally desperate bargaining. But Sarah had changed in that hospital bed, not just physically, but fundamentally. She'd seen who she really was to these people, and she'd made peace with the reality that their love was conditional on her financial support. When that support disappeared, so did their concern for her well-being. They'd literally chosen a vacation over visiting their daughter in the ICU and then had the audacity to demand she fund their return home. The real consequences began hitting them within days of their return from Hawaii. The utilities were shut off because they were in Sarah's name and she'd cancelled them. The mortgage payment bounced because the automatic transfer from her account was no longer active. The foreclosure notice arrived faster than any of them had expected, and that's when the desperate calls reached a new level of frequency and intensity. Sarah's apartment became a fortress of peace during this time. She blocked their numbers, but they called from other phones, from friends' phones, from payphones, from the landline at the motel where they had to stay after losing their house. Each call brought a new strategy, a new angle of attack. Anger gave way to bargaining, bargaining gave way to false remorse gave way to threats and accusations that she was destroying the family. "You already destroyed it," Sarah told her mother during one particularly pathetic phone conversation. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." The truth of those words settled over her like a warm blanket. She wasn't destroying anything. She was simply removing herself from a dynamic that had been slowly destroying her for years. The most revealing moment came when Emma's best friend called, pretending to conduct a survey about family relationships. It was clearly a setup, a ham-fisted attempt to manipulate Sarah into feeling guilty about her choices. The friend asked carefully rehearsed questions about forgiveness and second chances and the importance of family bonds. After 20 minutes of increasingly obvious manipulation, the friend made a critical error. "So hypothetically, if your sister was really truly sorry and maybe wrote you a heartfelt letter explaining everything, would you consider forgiving her?" Sarah almost laughed at how transparent it was. "Tell Emma I said no, Rachel, and tell her that using you as a go-between is exactly the kind of manipulative behavior that got her into this mess in the first place." The attempted ambush at her workplace was perhaps the most desperate move they made. Sarah was leaving her office building for lunch when she spotted her parents in the lobby, looking haggard and desperate, talking rapidly to the security guard who had apparently let them in. The sight of them in her professional space felt like a violation, an intrusion into the new life she was building for herself. "Security," she said calmly to the guard who had facilitated this ambush. "These people are harassing me. Please escort them out." Her mother screamed as security approached, her voice echoing through the marble lobby of Sarah's prestigious downtown office building. "I'm your mother. You can't just ignore your family." The security footage of this incident would later become something of a legend among Sarah's co-workers, a testament to her grace under pressure and her commitment to maintaining professional boundaries, even in personal crisis. But the lowest point came when Emma posted a lengthy social media manifesto about Sarah's supposed mental health crisis following her hospitalization. The post painted Sarah as unstable and vindictive, someone whose near-death experience had triggered a psychological break that was now tearing their loving family apart. Emma described herself and their parents as victims of Sarah's erratic behavior. Innocent people who just wanted to help their sick sister but were being punished for no reason. The post backfired spectacularly when several of Sarah's friends, people who had actually visited her in the hospital, began responding with their own accounts of Sarah's hospitalization. They described her fear and loneliness, how weak and vulnerable she'd been, how they'd brought her flowers and books and comfort while her family posted vacation photos from Hawaii. Emma's followers began connecting the dots, and the comment section devolved into a brutal takedown of Emma's character and a defense of Sarah's choices. Emma deleted the post within hours, but not before Sarah had screenshot the entire thing, adding it to a growing file of evidence that would later prove useful when her family's harassment escalated to the point where legal intervention became necessary. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and all three family members arrived dressed in their best clothes, still believing they could charm their way out of the consequences of their choices. The judge listened first to their carefully constructed story about a daughter who had suffered a mental breakdown following a minor illness, and was now punishing them for being unable to afford to visit her in the hospital. Their version of events painted them as loving, concerned family members who were being victimized by their unstable daughter's vindictive behavior. Then Sarah presented her evidence. Screenshots of the Hawaii vacation posts, copies of the cruel texts, documentation of the harassment, the workplace ambush, the false social media posts, and attempts to sabotage her relationships. She read her prepared statement in a steady voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. "Your Honor, these people didn't just abandon me when I nearly died, they mocked me for it. They told me that almost dying might finally make me interesting, and when I stopped financially supporting them as a result of this treatment, they spent months harassing me, lying about me, and trying to destroy my career and relationships. I'm asking for protection from people who see me as nothing more than a source of money and are willing to torment me when that money stops flowing." The restraining order was granted immediately, prohibiting them from contacting her directly or indirectly, coming within 500 feet of her home or workplace, or posting about her on social media. Violation of the order would result in immediate arrest. As they left the courthouse, her mother made one final desperate plea. "Sarah, please, we can work this out as a family. You don't need lawyers and judges." Sarah looked at the woman who had raised her, this person who still couldn't understand why legal protection had become necessary. "You made lawyers and judges necessary when you chose harassment over accountability." The silence that followed the restraining order was profound and beautiful. For the first time in months, Sarah's phone wasn't constantly buzzing with demands and accusations and desperate attempts at manipulation. She could focus on her recovery, both physical and emotional, without the constant drain of managing other people's crises and entitlement. But this is where Sarah's story becomes truly inspiring, where the pain and betrayal transform into something powerful and life-affirming. About 3 months after the Hawaii incident, Sarah received a call from her supervisor with news that would change her trajectory entirely. A client she'd worked with the previous year wanted to hire her away from her current company, offering her a vice president position with nearly double her current salary, stock options, and the opportunity to build a cybersecurity division from the ground up. The client specifically requested Sarah based on her innovative work that had saved their company from a major data breach. Her reputation in the industry was growing, built on her expertise and integrity, and the kind of professional relationships that flourish when you're not constantly distracted by family drama and financial manipulation. As Sarah negotiated her new salary and benefits package, she realized that removing her family's constant demands from her life had allowed her to focus fully on her career for the first time in years. The irony was striking. Sarah's professional success reached new heights, her family's situation continued its downward spiral. While she was signing contracts and leading meetings and being featured in industry publications as a rising star in cybersecurity, they were being evicted from motels for non-payment and desperately applying for minimum wage jobs they'd never had to consider when Sarah's money was supporting their lifestyle. Emma called from a payphone at one point, her voice thick with tears and desperation. "Sarah, please, we're literally homeless. We're sleeping in Dad's car. Mum's blood pressure medication ran out, and we can't afford to refill it. I'm working at Target now, 20 hours a week, but it's not enough." There was something almost surreal about listening to these pleas while Sarah sat in her new corner office, reviewing stock option agreements and planning strategic initiatives for a cybersecurity team she was building from scratch. "Have you considered getting a full-time job?" Sarah asked gently, genuinely curious about this novel concept. Emma's response revealed how deeply entrenched their sense of entitlement had become. 20 hours a week at Target is a job. What about Mum and Dad? Dad's applying places, but no one wants to hire someone his age. And Mum's too stressed to work. "Too stressed to work," Sarah repeated slowly, "but not too stressed to post Facebook rants about what a terrible daughter I am." The silence that followed was telling. They hadn't realized that Sarah could still see her mother's public posts, the ongoing social media campaign that painted Sarah as an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her loving family in their time of need. Meanwhile, Sarah's first day at her new company exceeded every expectation. She had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a team of 12 talented engineers, and a budget that made her head spin. During her welcome lunch with the executive team, the CEO personally thanked her for the work she'd done as a contractor. "Sarah, I want you to know that your security protocols didn't just save us money, they saved jobs. When hackers tried to breach our system last month, your safeguards held. Without them, we would have lost client data, faced lawsuits, maybe even gone under. You literally saved this company." That afternoon, a reporter from a major tech publication reached out for an interview about emerging trends in cybersecurity. Sarah's expertise was gaining recognition in ways that never would have been possible if she'd continued to subordinate her career to her family's constant financial emergencies. She was finally able to pursue professional opportunities without the distraction of managing other people's poor life choices. The contrast became even more stark when her mother created a GoFundMe page titled "Help a Family Destroyed by Their Daughter's Mental Illness." The description painted Sarah as an unstable person who had suffered a breakdown after being hospitalized and then abandoned her loving family out of spite and psychological instability. What her mother didn't anticipate was that Sarah now had professional connections throughout the tech industry, and some of those connections recognized her name from the fundraising campaign. Within 48 hours, the GoFundMe page was flooded with comments from colleagues, former clients, and industry contacts who knew Sarah personally and professionally. They began sharing their own experiences working with her, defending her character, and calling out the campaign as manipulative fraud. The comments section became a public testament to Sarah's integrity and professional accomplishments. Sarah Carter is one of the most professional and competent engineers I've ever worked with. This campaign is disgusting, wrote a senior developer from Microsoft. I worked with Sarah on 3 major projects. She is brilliant, kind, and absolutely not the person described here. This is clearly a scam, added the CTO of a startup Sarah had consulted for. Sarah saved our company from a devastating cyber attack. Her family should be proud, not exploiting her online. Shameful, commented the CEO of a data security firm. Her mother deleted the GoFundMe page within a week, but not before numerous people had screenshot it and shared it in tech forums as an example of family manipulation gone wrong. The incident actually enhanced Sarah's professional reputation as colleagues and clients saw how gracefully she handled personal attacks and how many people were willing to vouch for her character and competence. By month 6 at her new company, Sarah was succeeding beyond her wildest dreams. She'd implemented security protocols for 3 major corporations, spoken at 2 industry conferences, and been featured in a Forbes article about innovative women in cybersecurity. The Forbes piece included a photo of her in her office, looking confident and accomplished, with a caption highlighting her recent promotion to vice president and her groundbreaking work in corporate security. Her father called from yet another unknown number after the article was published. "Sarah, I saw the article. I'm really proud of you," he said, his voice carrying a weariness that hadn't been there before the Hawaii incident. Sarah waited for the inevitable request. "Are you calling to congratulate me or to ask for money?" The long pause that followed told her everything she needed to know. "We really are struggling, honey. Just a small loan to help us get back on our feet." "There it is," Sarah said softly, and hung up. The pattern was so predictable it was almost comforting in its consistency. No matter how successful she became, no matter how clearly she'd established her boundaries, they still saw her primarily as a source of funding for their problems. The irony wasn't lost on her that as her career soared to unprecedented heights, their situation continued to deteriorate. It was like watching 2 trains on parallel tracks, one speeding toward success and the other careening toward disaster. The difference was that Sarah was now focused entirely on her own train, her own destination, her own journey toward the life she wanted to build. Her personal life was flourishing as well. Without the constant stress of managing family crises and financial emergencies, Sarah had energy for friendships, hobbies, and dating that she'd never experienced before. She joined a hiking group and connected with other professionals who shared her interests. She started taking cooking classes and discovered she enjoyed entertaining. She was learning who she was when she wasn't constantly giving pieces of herself away to people who never appreciated what they were receiving. When Sarah met David, a fellow tech professional she encountered at an industry conference, she was upfront about her family situation from the beginning. She expected it to scare him away, as most people couldn't imagine completely cutting off their biological family. Instead, he listened to the entire story and said, "Sarah, what you did took incredible strength. Most people stay trapped in toxic family dynamics their whole lives because they can't imagine living differently. You chose yourself, and that's not selfish. That's healthy." His family's response was equally supportive. When Sarah nervously explained why her parents wouldn't be attending family gatherings, David's mother immediately said, "Their loss is our gain. We get you all to ourselves." The difference was startling and healing in ways Sarah hadn't expected. David's family included her in everything: holiday planning, family photos, even arguments about vacation destinations. They treated her like she'd always belonged, while her biological family had treated her like an ATM with a pulse. Around this time, Sarah began receiving updates about her family's ongoing struggles from various sources. Her cousin Mark would occasionally call with information, not because she asked for it, but because he felt she should know how her choices were playing out in their lives. Emma got fired from Target for chronic tardiness and attitude problems, he told her during one conversation. She's trying to restart her influencer career, but she only has about 200 followers left. Most people unfollowed her after that post about you being mentally ill. Sarah felt nothing when she heard these updates. No satisfaction or regret, just complete emotional detachment. They were strangers now, people she used to know who had made their choices and were living with the consequences. The most telling update came a year later when Mark called to inform her that her mother had been arrested for shoplifting at a grocery store. She tried to steal makeup and some expensive cheese, he said, clearly embarrassed to be sharing this information. When they caught her, she had a complete meltdown in the store, screaming about how her daughter had ruined her life and driven her to this. Sarah listened to this account with the same detachment she'd feel hearing about a stranger's troubles. Did she mention that her daughter was in the ICU while she was vacationing in Hawaii? Actually, yes, Mark replied. She was raving about how you were being dramatic about being sick, and that's why they went on vacation. The store manager's daughter had been in intensive care with COVID the year before, and he wasn't sympathetic to her story. The charges were eventually dropped, but the incident became local news because of her mother's outburst in the store. Even facing criminal charges, her mother continued playing the victim, refusing to take responsibility for her actions or acknowledge the role her choices had played in creating her current circumstances. This was perhaps the clearest illustration of why Sarah's decision to cut them off had been not just justified, but necessary for her own well-being and growth. By this time, Sarah had saved more money in 1 year than she'd previously thought possible. She bought a beautiful house in the hills overlooking Denver, adopted a golden retriever named Charlie, and began living her life for herself rather than for ungrateful family members who'd seen her as nothing more than a paycheck. The best part was how genuinely happy she felt. The stress of constantly worrying about her family's finances, being solicited for money, and being taken for granted was completely gone. She felt lighter, freer, and more authentically herself than she had in years. She was also building something beautiful with David, whose proposal came on the anniversary of her hospitalization. "I want to spend my life with the woman who had the courage to choose herself," he said. And Sarah realized that her decision to cut off her toxic family had led her directly to the love and partnership she'd always deserved but never believed she could have. A year after the Hawaii incident, Sarah ran into her father at a grocery store. He looked older, more worn down, carefully using coupons and shopping the clearance sections. "Sarah," he said quietly when he recognized her, "you look good. Healthy." She was healthy, inside and out, in ways she'd never been when she was supporting their dysfunction. "I'm glad," he continued after a pause. "I want you to know that I understand we messed up. I know we failed you when you needed us most. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what we lost." It was the first genuine apology any of them had offered, and Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, even though it didn't change anything fundamental about their relationship. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, "but understanding what you lost doesn't undo the damage you caused." He nodded sadly. "I know. I just hope someday you might give us a chance to show we've learned from this." Sarah considered his words carefully. "Maybe someday, but right now I'm focused on the family I'm building with people who actually care about me." As she walked away from that encounter, Sarah felt something unexpected. Pity. Not regret for her choices or desire to reconcile, but genuine sadness for people who had prioritized money and comfort over love and loyalty, and were now experiencing the natural consequences of those choices. They had traded their relationship with someone who genuinely loved them for a few years of financial support, and now they had neither the relationship nor the financial security. 2 years later, Sarah and David were married in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends who had become chosen family, colleagues who'd supported her through her family's harassment, neighbors who'd brought her soup when she was recovering, college friends who'd driven hours to visit her in the hospital when her biological family couldn't be bothered to change their vacation plans. Emma attempted to crash the wedding, having apparently monitored Sarah's social media through fake accounts to learn about the event. Security escorted her out before she could cause a scene, but not before she screamed loud enough for everyone to hear. She wasn't even really sick. She's just a dramatic attention seeker. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Here was a woman whose entire identity was built around seeking attention on social media, calling someone else dramatic. David's mother, who had become like a second mother to Sarah, wrapped her arm around her after the incident. Honey, I don't know what your sister's problem is, but I want you to know that David's family is your family now. We'll never let anyone treat you the way she just did. That's when Sarah finally broke down in tears, not from sadness or anger, but from relief and gratitude. She had spent so many years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it authentically, and now she was surrounded by people who offered it freely and consistently. The final chapter of this story happened 6 months ago when Sarah received a call from Mark with an update that crystallized everything about her family's ongoing dysfunction. Your mum's been telling everyone who will listen that you abandoned the family when they needed you most, he reported. She's been spreading this story about how you got a little sick and then cut them off financially to punish them for not visiting immediately. A little sick, Sarah repeated, remembering the machines and monitors, the fear and pain, the very real possibility that she might not survive. That's what she's calling it. Mark's response revealed how their dishonesty had undermined their attempts to gain sympathy from extended family and friends. But Sarah, I wanted you to know that not everyone believes her. Some of us remember the photos they posted from Hawaii while you were in the ICU. Some of us think what you did was exactly what they deserved. After that conversation, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had transformed since that terrifying week in the hospital. She was now 30 years old, married to a man who loved her unconditionally, thriving in a career she was passionate about, living in a home she cherished, with a dog who greeted her like she was the most important person in the world every time she walked through the door. She had friends who checked on her when she was sick, who celebrated her successes without jealousy, and who supported her dreams without expecting anything in return. David's mother called her daughter and meant it completely. She had chosen a family who would move heaven and earth to help her if she ever needed it again. People who saw her inherent worth rather than her financial utility. Sometimes, as she sat on her deck at sunset with David and Charlie, watching the city lights twinkle in the valley below, Sarah remembered that frightened, lonely woman in the ICU bed, fighting for her life while her family posed for vacation photos. She thought about how that woman had screenshot those terrible texts and made a decision that changed everything. She smiled because that woman had chosen herself finally, after years of choosing everyone else first, and it had made all the difference. The beautiful irony of revenge is that the best kind doesn't involve hurting those who wronged you. It's about building a life so fulfilling that their absence becomes a gift rather than a loss. They thought losing Sarah wouldn't matter much. They expected her to come back eventually, checkbook in hand, begging for forgiveness, and ready to resume funding their lifestyle. Instead, they lost the best thing that had ever happened to them, and Sarah gained the life she'd always wanted but had been too busy taking care of them to realize she didn't have. This is a story about boundaries, about self-worth, about the courage to walk away from people who don't value what you bring to their lives. It's about the revolutionary act of choosing yourself when everyone around you has taught you that your only value lies in what you can give them. Most importantly, it's about the incredible life that becomes possible when you stop accepting crumbs from people who should be offering you the whole feast of genuine love and respect. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are actually the ones who see you least clearly. Sometimes family isn't about blood, but about who shows up, who stays, who celebrates your victories and comforts your defeats without expecting payment for their presence. Sarah learned that creating boundaries isn't cruel, it's essential. She learned that blood doesn't automatically make someone family, and removing toxic people from your life, even relatives, can be the healthiest thing you ever do for yourself. Most importantly, she learned she deserved better. She deserved to be surrounded by people who would drop everything to be by her side in a crisis, not people who would mock her for nearly dying. Today, Sarah has all of that and more. She chose herself, and in doing so, she found the love and life she'd always deserved, but never thought she could have. That's a trade she would make every single time, and a lesson that might just change your life if you're brave enough to apply it to your own circumstances.